Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in the year 2021. We are on day 256, and we are getting to enter into the fascinating world of Daniel. We're going to be looking at Daniel chapters 1 to 3. And many of us remember Daniel from Sunday school years, Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace, and so on. But Daniel is really first and foremost a prophet. And the things that he received in vision and in conversation with angels is actually quite astounding. But we start off first of all with the history and the context of where we find Daniel. So in chapter 1, verses 1 to 2, we have this timeline. And so it's in the third year of the rule of Judah's king Jehoiakim. Now, this means that this is really in that first wave of exiles. So Daniel, he missed all the downfall, the disaster that happened to Jerusalem. He was taken out early. So in the third year of the rule of Judah's king Jehoiakim, Babylon's king Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem and attacked it. The Lord handed Judah's king Jehoiakim over to Nebuchadnezzar, along with some of the equipment from God's house. Nebuchadnezzar took these to Shinar, to his own God's temple, putting them in his God's treasury. This will come into play later on down the road as we get into the return of the exiles. But in this moment, Daniel he's going to become an advisor to the king. He's going to become an assistant in the court as Jerusalem is eventually totally destroyed. That's something to think about. And keep that in the timeline. So this is the time of Jeremiah. We have Jeremiah who's prophesying at this time, and there's some other prophets that are happening all at this, like Ezra, are happening all at the same time that Daniel is here. In verse verses 3 to 4, we have the context of what's taking place here. Nebuchadnezzar instructed his highest official, Ashpenaz, to choose royal descendants and members of the ruling class from the Israelites. So Daniel is not some orphan off the street. Daniel comes from royalty or from the hierarchy, the upper, you know what I mean? That upper tier of Israelites, the leaders, the wealthy, and so on. So Nebuchadnezzar is looking for good-looking young men without defects, skilled in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, conversant with learning, and capable of serving in the king's palace. Ashpenaz was to teach them the Chaldean language and its literature. So he's going to cultivate them. They're already cultivated, but according to the Jewish ways, and now they're going to be cultivated according to the Chaldean ways in order that they would become useful for the king. Then we have this point of tension. And we have a quantity of time here, just a clarification on it. So in verse 5, the king assigned these young men daily allotments. So this is the king who's gone through and he personally has picked out this diet for them. Okay, so the king assigned these young men daily allotments from his own food and from the royal wine. Ashpenaz was to teach them for 3 years. So they have 3 years to get up to par. 3 years. This doesn't happen overnight. It's 3 years. So that at the end of that time, they could serve before the king. Now, in verse 8, we catch just a little glimpse of how unique Daniel is. So Daniel decided that he wouldn't pollute himself with the king's rations or the royal wine, and he appealed to the chief official in hopes that he wouldn't have to do so. So Daniel already had some knowledge that these rich foods and the intoxicating wine would actually take away from them, not add to them. So in verses 12 to 13, we see Daniel's wisdom and logic here. why not test your servants for 10 days? So like the servant of Nebuchadnezzar doesn't want to do this. He's worried that Daniel and his friends will end up not looking great at all, and he's going to be considered a failure before the king. So Daniel says, why not test your servants for 10 days? Okay, so this is going to be 3 years. So Daniel's asking him, of those 3 years, take the first 10 days. You could give us a diet of vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance to the appearance of the young men who eat the king's food. Then deal with your servants according to what you see. So Daniel is willing to put his money where his mouth is. Like, let's test this out. And if it doesn't appear to be working, then, we'll go with what you say. And then in verse 15, we have the results. At the end of the 10 days, they looked better and healthier than all the young men who are eating the king's food. So we can see here already that the Lord's hand is on Daniel. He's giving him wisdom and understanding, and is bringing him success already. In verse 17, and God gave knowledge, mastery of all literature, and wisdom to these 4 men. Daniel himself gained understanding of every type of vision and dream. So, this is the thing, plant the crop, but God has to bless it, right? Do the work, but God has to bless it. This is where we have to get, we put in what we're supposed to put in, and the Lord brings success to that thing. But the success doesn't belong to us. The success belongs to him. So, God gave knowledge, mastery. They still had to study, they still had to read, but they comprehended, they understood, they absorbed this stuff, and were able to deal with it. And then where it says Daniel himself gained, this is again the blessing of the Lord. The Lord gave him this gift of understanding of every type of vision and dream. It's not something you can gain any other way. This is a supernatural thing. So then, the result of the 3 years of blessed training, we find here in verses 19 to 21. When the king spoke with them, he found no one as good as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they took their place in the king's service. Whenever the king consulted them about any aspect of wisdom and understanding, he found them head and shoulders above all the dream interpreters and enchanters in his entire kingdom. And Daniel stayed in the king's service until the first year of King Cyrus. That's a long time. Daniel went through a lot of kings, and we're talking, we're talking with 70 years or so. David or Daniel was part of the first exiles, and it was with Cyrus that the first exiles returned to Jerusalem. So that's 70 years. So he's a young man. We don't know how young, somewhere probably between 15 to 19. Add 70 years to that, and you're looking at 85, 89 years old. So that's just to put some of that into perspective. Then we have in Daniel chapter 2, we have a problem here in verses 5 to 6. The king has a dream. He has a dream, and he wants it interpreted. But the thing is, not only does he want it interpreted, he's sick. He was probably sick of this showmanship and everything else. He wants them to tell him what his dream is, and then to interpret it, what it means. That's a lot to ask, especially if these guys are fake and making this stuff up. So they come at him and say, this is unfair. Like, nobody's ever asked of this before. And so the king answered the Chaldeans, my decision is final. If you can't tell me the dream and its meaning, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into trash dumps. But if you do explain the dream and its meaning, you'll receive generous gifts and glorious honor from me. So explain to me the dream as well as its meaning. So of course they couldn't. So the king turns around and he orders them all to be killed, everybody to be killed, and that would include Daniel and his 3 companions. So in verse 14, we find Daniel just, he's again expressing his confidence in Yahweh. Then Daniel, with wisdom and sound judgment, responded to Arioch. He's the one carried out given charge to carry out the deaths of all these people. So to Arioch, the king's chief executioner, who had gone out to kill Babylon sages. So yeah, he's just saying, like, yeah, I can do this. I can tell the king I can do this. So verse 16 to 18, we find Daniel just asking for some time. And this is our problem. Those of us who have operated in the dream interpretation and such, sometimes that interpretation isn't right there. There's other times people speak and you hear, what it means exactly. Other times it's not. You have to come aside. And it could be just you yourself. You're so caught up in things. This is a person maybe that you love, that you're involved with, and you know what you want for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean what the dream means. And along with the interpretation of the dream, sometimes it's not given to the interpreter, the sage counsel that comes with it. And the person who receives the understanding of that dream still needs to seek the Lord for wisdom in this thing. So, there might be a dream that's interpreted that a friend is going to ask you to do something that you're very familiar with, but there's danger in it. So beware. What exactly is that? I don't know, but that's the interpretation. So when that moment comes, you really need to be paying attention to the Holy Spirit. So he goes, yeah, it's this, and then you've already received warning on that, and you can do something about it. Some people, they get the dream interpretation, and then they don't do anything with it. They just forget it, set it aside. And it might be for a year down the road, because there's preparation that you have to do, and it might be in a week's time, it might be tonight, but you need to be engaged with it. So here we find Daniel seeking time. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so he could explain the dream's meaning to him. Then Daniel went to his house and explained the situation to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so that they would ask the God of heaven for help about this mystery, in hopes that Daniel and his friends wouldn't die with the rest of Babylon's sages. So it's even self-preservation is a good motivation there. So then, the dream, Daniel's given insight as to what the dream is, what the dream means, and he goes and he tells the king. And so Daniel answered the king, sages, enchanters, dream interpreters, and diviners can't explain to the king the mystery he seeks. But there is a God in heaven, a revealer of mysteries, who has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Now, this was your dream. This was the vision in your head as you lay in your bed. And he lays it out for him along with the interpretation. And then in verse 30, we see why this is important. Now, this mystery was revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than any other living person. Okay, so Daniel is extremely humble here. He doesn't think that any of this has to do with him, everything to do with Yahweh. So I have, not because I have more wisdom than any other living person, but so that the dream's meaning might be made known to the king, and so that you might know the thoughts of your own mind. So Daniel's saying, this has nothing to do with me. This has been given to me so that you can understand. And then the result of this whole thing, we find in verse 47 to 49, the king declared to Daniel, no doubt about it, your God is God of gods, Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, because you were able to reveal this mystery. Then the king exalted Daniel and lavished gifts on him, making him ruler over all the provinces of Babylon and chief minister over all Babylon's sages. At Daniel's urging, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to administer the province of Babylon, but Daniel himself remained at the royal court. So, yeah, it resulted in Yahweh being lifted up, Yahweh being glorified and recognized in all of this. but as well for Daniel and his friends to receive promotion and prosperity and to be moved into these positions of influence. They didn't become king. They became advisors. So influence. I just highlight that for you. So then we go over to chapter 3, and I know there's a lot contained in these 3 chapters, but this is really important because when we're looking at the relationship with Yahweh, it's important for us to understand our relationship with Yahweh, our relationship with one another, and our relationship with the world. And we see a lot of it in all of this. So in Daniel 3, verse 1, here's this tension. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue. It was 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up in the Dura Valley in the province of Babylon. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest king in the moment, he's wicked, he's evil. He goes in and destroys entire civilizations. He thinks very highly of himself. He's full of pride, such arrogance, incredible. So it shouldn't surprise us that he set up an idol of himself to be worshipped. But the Jews will not bow to an idol. They won't. Okay, they've seen what's happened to Jerusalem. They know that this is the reason why they're in this mess, and they just refuse. So then at that moment, in verse 8, at that moment, some Chaldeans came forward, seizing a chance to attack the Jews. Why? Because they're extremely jealous. The Jews are successful. They're in positions of great responsibility and influence. They're very wealthy. So they figure if they get them out of the way, they can take those positions, right? Makes sense. So then in chapter 3, verses 16 to 18, we find this statement of unreserved dedication. That's what this really represents. The king has made this declaration. If you don't worship the idol, you'll be thrown into the fire. These Jews are brought forward to him. He says, here's your chance, bow down and worship. And they give him this unreserved statement of dedication. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answer King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to answer your question. If our God, the one we serve, is able to rescue us from the furnace of flaming fire and from your power, your majesty, then let him rescue us. But if he doesn't, know this for certain, your majesty, we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. Now, there's people today who are trying to draw parallels between what's happening with the governments and COVID and this very thing here. But this was an attack on the relationship with Yahweh. That's not what we're finding in our current day. This is where Nebuchadnezzar was trying to replace their worship of Yahweh with worship of himself, and they're just saying there's no way. No, we're not going to jeopardize our relationship with Yahweh to preserve our life. We're not going to do it. Yeah, and so in verses 24 to 25, we see the hand of Yahweh. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in shock and said to his associates, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? They answered the king, certainly, your majesty. He replied, look, I see 4 men unbound walking around inside the fire, and they aren't hurt. The 4th one looks like one of the gods. There is so much that Yahweh is throwing at King Nebuchadnezzar, so much. And we see what it's resulting in verse 29 to 30. The king says, I now issue a decree to every people, nation, and language, whoever speaks disrespectfully about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God will be torn limb from limb, and their house made a trash heap, because there is no other God who can rescue like this. Then the king made Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego prosperous in the province of Babylon. So what was meant to be a curse became a blessing because they stayed faithful to Yahweh. They stayed faithful in that relationship. It was not that they set out to be rebellious against this king. They served this king. They continued to serve this king who is not converted, but who is recognizing who Yahweh is. And Yahweh is revealing himself to him through Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's really an important thing here to highlight, that we're in this world as influencers, and we should not compromise our relationship with Yahweh. We should not compromise. And when we don't compromise, it's incredible the things that he's willing to do through us and for us. Okay, well, you guys be blessed in this day, and as you pursue relationship, I have no doubt that there's tremendous blessing in store for you. We'll catch up again tomorrow. God bless.